Right now, conservatives are set to rally outside the Capitol Hill, that is. They want to push for what they're saying is a, quote, immediate repeal and replace of Obamacare. Among the crowd, Senators Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, Mike Lee, also members of the House Freedom Caucus, including Mark Meadows, Jim Jordan, and Dave Bratt. This, as the White House is signaling now an openness to change or amend the plan. So the question is, are conservatives about to get a major victory? Well, here to help us break it all down, tax policy expert Dan Mitchell, GOP fundraiser Noelle Nikpour, and Democratic strategist Christy Setzer. Dan, let me start with you. I got to tell you, the Freedom Caucus and other conservatives have been standing their ground pretty good on this, and they're saying, hey, A, this is not really repeal, and B, if we do this, we'll be harming the American public.
Well, I think they're right. If you look at this issue just from the perspective of fiscal policy, as a conservative or libertarian, you'd be pretty happy. Big cut in taxes, big cut in spending. But if you look at it from the perspective of health care, are you solving the underlying third-party payer problem that's caused not only by the Obamacare mandates and regulations, but by all the other government intervention that pre-existed Obamacare? That's what this bill doesn't do. And so I think a lot of people are concerned if you just pass this bill as is, you're not going to solve the problem in the health care sector. Then all of a sudden, Republicans on the Hill will be blamed for all the problems in the healthcare field instead of Obama.
And yet, Noelle, the Paul Ryan, he's been out there, he's been selling it and promoting it. President Trump is going to go to Tennessee later on today to help sell this as well. So the White House is on board, and so is some of the elites in the party. Could this create a serious long-term strain?
It could, especially come election time. And one of the things I noticed that was very interesting is Cruz, Paul, Lee, and even Cotton. They have one thing in common. They are very financially backed in election season by the Club for Growth, which is a very, very conservative hawk. And they really follow and they do a checklist. This group, the Club for Growth, will challenge somebody in a primary if they do not hold their promise to the Club for Growth for making sure that they represent their values. So, and you've got to look at that, because I think that it's very important. These guys are going to hold their opposition to Paul Ryan because the Club for Growth does not like what Ryan's put out. And if you think about it, this is a very important grassroots part, the conservative movement of the Republican Party. So they can make things great, and they can work alongside, or they can make it miserable.
Christy, apparently the goal is a three-phase approach, if you will. The final phase will include wooing Democrats. That's because they need to do things like remove these state barriers, create competition. Competition, as we know, typically brings down costs and will create more opportunities for lower income and middle class families to buy the kind of health care plans that meet them. Do you think there are enough Democrats out there who are thinking, forgetting about party lines for a moment, that we probably need a smarter replacement?
Yeah, I think that the real question is, do we believe that there really is a phase 2 or 3? And I think if you listen to people, including Tom Cotton, no, we don't. So I don't think that you can really talk about whether it's realistic to woo Democrats until you talk about getting beyond this, quote, first phase of the plan.
Let's just say we get there, though. Obamacare hasn't delivered what it promised. Consequently, consequently, you do have a Republican in the White House who was propelled there in part because of those giant premium spikes on the eve of the election. So are there enough Democrats that might say, hey, you know what, forgetting about ideology for a minute, we owe it to the citizens of America to try to work with this?
Yeah, well, you have two things going on here, right? There's Democrats who certainly acknowledge that there are tweaks that we can make to the Affordable Care Act. And one thing that I think is interesting is that regardless of who is going to win the election, whether it was going to be Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, nobody was going to repeal and replace, nobody was going to keep ACA exactly the way it was. Everybody was going to make tweaks around the edges. So I certainly think that you can get Democrats on board for those so-called tweaks. But again, that's not what we're seeing here. We're seeing a throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So, you know, if we get to a substantially different place, could you potentially woo some, the Joe Manchins of the world? Yeah, maybe, but that's almost an alternate reality from where we are right now. All right.